The rain fell in a cold, determined sheet, a gray curtain that blurred the world into a watercolor of smeared headlights and slick, black asphalt. From the back of her chauffeured Maybach, Catherine Sterling watched the city dissolve. The leather smelled of wealth and insulation, a hermetic seal against the unpleasantness of the weather and the people forced to endure it. Her focus, however, was not on the comfort of her surroundings but on the numbers scrolling across the tablet in her lap. Sterling conglomerates had posted another record quarter, a testament to her ruthless efficiency in acquiring undervalued assets and stripping them for parts, selling off the profitable divisions and liquidating the rest. Sentiment was a liability. History was a sunk cost. Only the forward-looking projection mattered. Her car slowed to a crawl in the mid-morning traffic, the engine a barely perceptible hum. It was then that she saw him. A man, walking on the sodden grass verge beside the road, his head bowed against the downpour. He wore a simple, dark jacket that was soaked through, clinging to his frame. His jeans were dark with rain, and his work boots, though sturdy, splashed through ankle-deep puddles with every determined stride. He carried nothing, no umbrella, no briefcase. He just walked, a solitary, miserable figure moving with a strange, unhurried rhythm. Catherine felt a flicker of irritation. People like him were scenery, a reminder of the inefficiency she worked so hard to excise from her world. They were the friction in the system, the rounding errors on a balance sheet. He was, in a word, irrelevant. Her driver cleared his throat. "Traffic is stalled, Miss Sterling." "An accident up ahead," she grunted a response, her eyes leaving the man and returning to the clean, absolute certainty of the numbers on her screen. Elias Thorne felt the cold seep into his bones, but he didn't alter his pace. It was a measured, ground-covering gait he had perfected over years of needing to get from one place to another without waste. 8 miles. His old truck, a machine he had kept running for 2 decades through sheer will and mechanical aptitude, had finally surrendered that morning. A cracked engine block. Terminal. There was no money for a taxi, not when Lily's school trip fees were due. So he walked. The interview was for a general maintenance position at a disused industrial park on the edge of town. It was beneath his skill set, a fact he had reconciled with long ago. But it was steady work, and steadiness was the foundation upon which he had rebuilt his life. Each step was a quiet calculation. The rain was a known variable. The distance was a constant. His arrival time was the solution he was walking toward. He thought of his daughter, Lily, who would be in her second-grade classroom now, probably drawing one of her intricate pictures of imaginary machines. She had his mind for systems, but his late wife's artistic soul. That morning, as he had checked his worn but clean clothes for the interview, she had stood in the doorway, a solemn observer. "Are you going to build things again, Daddy?" she had asked. He had smoothed her hair. "I'm going to see about a job that lets me fix things," he had replied. It was a careful distinction. Building was what he used to do. Building was from before. Fixing was for now. The memory of her serious, trusting face was a better coat than the one he wore, a warmth that pushed back against the chill of the rain. He kept walking, his gaze fixed on a point far down the road, his mind methodical and clear. Before this life of quiet obscurity, Elias Thorne had been a name spoken with a kind of reverence in a very small, very exclusive circle. He had been the lead systems engineer at Innovatech Automotive, a boutique research and development firm that designed and built prototype engine and chassis components for the world's most demanding racing circuits and hypercar manufacturers. His hands, now calloused from mending fences and patching pipes, had once calibrated machines worth more than the house he lived in. He held 3 patents for integrated drivetrain control systems, designs of such elegance and efficiency that they had become the unspoken industry standard. His office had not been a corner suite with a view, but a glass-walled enclosure overlooking a workshop floor where his abstract theories were rendered in carbon fiber and titanium. He had thrived in that world of infinitesimal tolerances and immense physical forces. He understood the language of metal under stress, of fluid dynamics, of harmonic resonance. He could diagnose a flaw in a gearbox by the faint whine it made at a specific RPM or predict a structural failure by analyzing the heat signature of a weld. His work was a silent conversation with the physical world, a process of asking questions with instruments and receiving answers in the form of data. He was not an executive, he was a master craftsman, a creator in a world that increasingly valued only the traders and the managers. He had been content. More than content, he had been fulfilled. The end came not with a bang, but with the stroke of a pen on a contract. Sterling conglomerates acquired Innovatech. Catherine Sterling herself had toured the facility once. Elias remembered her walking through the pristine workshop in sharp heels that clicked with an alien authority on the polished concrete floor. She had looked at the bespoke fabrication machines, the chassis dynamometers, the clean rooms, with the same dispassionate gaze she might give a spreadsheet. She saw liabilities, not capabilities. She saw depreciating assets, not the tools of creation. Within 6 months, the R&D division was shuttered. The patents were absorbed into the Sterling portfolio, the brilliant team of engineers and technicians were laid off with standard severance packages, and the facility was decommissioned. Its specialized, one-of-a-kind equipment was deemed too niche to sell and too expensive to move. It was left to rust. For Elias, the timing was catastrophic. His wife, Helen, had been diagnosed with a rare, aggressive cancer just weeks before the acquisition. The corporate insurance that would have covered her experimental treatments vanished with his job. He spent their savings, then sold his patents back to Sterling conglomerates for a fraction of their worth just to afford her a few more months of comfort. It wasn't enough. After she was gone, he was left with Lily, a mountain of medical debt, and a profound disillusionment with the corporate world that had built him up and then discarded him without a thought. He made a conscious choice. He would not chase that life again. He would not entrust his family's security to the whims of a boardroom. He would work with his hands, live simply, and raise his daughter. He would be present. He traded ambition for stability, a corner office for a quiet life. It was a price he paid without regret. His only remaining link to that former life was Marcus Cole. They had started at Innovatech together, Elias in engineering and Marcus in the legal department. Marcus had seen the Sterling acquisition for what it was and had left to start his own small practice, specializing in intellectual property law. He was the one who had urged Elias to apply for the maintenance job. "It's not what you are, Eli, I know that," Marcus had said over the phone the night before. "But it's at the old North plant. The old Innovatech facility. At least you'd know the layout. You could fix those heating systems in your sleep," Elias had agreed. There was a certain grim irony to it that appealed to his sense of order. Returning as a janitor to the place where he had once been a king. Marcus knew the truth. He knew the mind that was housed within the quiet, unassuming man. "That woman, Sterling," Marcus had muttered. "She has no idea what she threw away. Not just the company. The people." You, Elias had simply listened. There was nothing to say. The past was the past. By the time he reached the gates of the industrial park, the rain had lessened to a persistent drizzle. The name on the main sign was faded, but still legible beneath the Sterling conglomerate's logo slapped over it, Innovatech Automotive. Weeds grew through cracks in the asphalt of the vast, empty parking lot. He walked toward the administrative building, the only one that looked even remotely active. He was 10 minutes early, despite the 8-mile walk. Punctuality was a function of planning, and Elias was a planner. He smoothed his damp hair and pushed the wet sleeves of his jacket up his forearms, trying to make himself presentable. He walked through the automatic doors, his worn boots squeaking softly on the polished marble floor, a relic of a time when the building had been a showpiece. A young man in a crisp suit looked up from the reception desk, his expression a mixture of surprise and mild disapproval. "Can I help you?" "I'm here for an interview," Elias said, his voice quiet but clear. "For the maintenance position. My name is Elias Thorne." The young man, David, checked his tablet. "Mr. Thorne." "Yes." "You're scheduled with Miss Sterling herself." He seemed surprised by this, as if a clerical error had been made. "She's finishing a call. You can wait here." David gestured to a row of hard plastic chairs. Elias sat, perfectly still, his hands resting on his knees. He did not fidget. He did not look around nervously. He simply waited, a study in patience. He could feel the young man's eyes on him, cataloging the damp clothes, the weathered face, the calloused hands. He was being assessed and dismissed long before the interview had even begun. He was used to it. People saw a laborer, a mechanic. They did not see the architect of the systems that ran the modern world. Catherine Sterling ended her call with a curt dismissal and glanced at the resume on her desk. Elias Thorne. The work history was sparse for the last few years. Handyman. Freelance mechanic. Before that, a 10-year gap. And before that, a line that made her pause. Lead systems engineer, Innovatech Automotive. The name was a distant memory, one of a dozen small, inefficient firms she had acquired and dismantled. She had a vague recollection of a tour, of men in lab coats and a lot of expensive-looking machinery that her CFO had assured her was functionally worthless on the open market. She pressed the intercom. David, send him in. She stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the sprawling, derelict campus of the old plant. What a waste of prime real estate. Her plan was to level the entire site and sell the cleared land to a logistics company for a warehouse depot. The maintenance man was just a temporary measure, someone to keep the pipes from bursting until the demolition permits came through. The door opened and Elias walked in. Catherine turned from the window, and her expression hardened almost imperceptibly. It was the man from the side of the road. The drowned rat. Her mind, conditioned to make snap judgments based on appearance and presentation, had its verdict in an instant. This was not a serious person. His clothes were damp. He looked tired. He projected not ambition, but weary resignation. She gestured to the chair opposite her massive desk, a barrier of polished mahogany and steel between them. Mr. Thorne. Thank you for coming in. The formality was sharp, a tool to maintain distance. Elias met her gaze. He recognized her, too. The woman in the back of the Maybach, her face illuminated by the glow of a screen. The two worlds had collided. He sat, his back straight, his posture economical and without deference. He did not apologize for his appearance. He did not offer an excuse. He waited for her to speak. The silence stretched, a tactical move on her part that she used to unsettle opponents in negotiations. It had no effect on Elias. He was comfortable with silence. It was in silence that the best work was done. Finally, she spoke, her tone clipped and dismissive. Your resume is unconventional. You were an engineer at this very facility. I see. It was not a question. It was an accusation. Yes, Elias said. And now you're applying for a position that involves plumbing and basic electrical, she continued, her eyes scanning the paper as if it were contaminated. It's quite a fall, wouldn't you say? It's a job, Elias replied, his voice even. The work is necessary. Catherine leaned back, a faint, condescending smile on her lips. This was the moment of dismissal, the emotional pivot of the encounter. She saw him not as a man with a hidden past, but as a failure, a case study in downward mobility. We're looking for someone with a certain drive, Mr. Thorne. Someone who presents a professional image. The face of the company, even at this level, matters. She looked pointedly at his damp jacket. I'm not sure you're the right fit for the corporate culture we're building at Sterling. Elias understood completely. He was being judged on the rain, on the failure of his old truck, on the simple fact of his poverty. His skills, his mind, his history, none of it mattered. He had been weighed on the scales of surface appearance and found wanting. He stood up. I understand, he said. There was no anger in his voice, only a quiet acceptance of a fact. He had not failed the interview. The interview had failed him. Thank you for your time, he said. He turned and walked out of the office, his footsteps once again making a soft, squeaking sound on the floor. He did not look back. Catherine watched him go, a feeling of satisfaction settling over her. She had efficiently dealt with an unsuitable candidate. She had protected the brand. She made a note on her tablet, relist position. Screen for more professional applicants. Then she turned her attention back to the larger, more important matter, the liquidation of the North plant. She called her head of acquisitions. Mark, she said, her voice all business. About the Innovatech property. Forget trying to sell the equipment. It's scrap. Just get it off the books. List the entire parcel, buildings and all, for land value minus projected demolition costs. I want it gone by the end of the quarter. A clean slate. She hung up, confident in her decision. It was a minor problem, now neatly solved. As Elias walked out of the building and back into the gray afternoon, he was not defeated. He was thinking. He had seen the state of the buildings. He had seen the weeds and the neglect. And he had heard the unspoken truth in Catherine Sterling's voice: she had no idea what she owned. She saw a collection of old buildings on a plot of land. He saw a comprehensive, state-of-the-art fabrication and testing facility, dormant but not dead. He knew every inch of that place. He knew the quirks of the ventilation system, the load capacity of the overhead cranes, the power requirements of the machine shop. He knew what was stored in the climate-controlled chambers in Workshop C, behind locks that no one had likely opened in years. He walked not home, but to the public library. He didn't need a job from Catherine Sterling. He needed a loan. He found a computer and pulled up the county's commercial real estate listings. A few days later, it appeared. For sale, 42-acre industrial campus. Zoned heavy industrial. Sold as is. Price, $100,000. It was an insultingly low price, calculated, as he had suspected, to be just land value minus the cost of tearing everything down. They were not selling a facility, they were paying someone to take a liability off their hands. He printed the listing and called Marcus. "I need your help," he said. "I'm going to buy the old plant." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Marcus was silent, not from shock, but from calculation. He knew Elias better than anyone. He knew that Elias did not have flights of fancy. "How much?" Marcus asked. "They're asking $100,000, Elias said. "I have about $20,000 from Helen's life insurance." The part one didn't spend, he had never touched that money. It felt sacred. "I need to find the rest." "I have 50, Marcus said without hesitation. "It's my savings, my kid's college fund. But it's yours if you need it. I've never made a better investment than betting on you, Eli." The unwavering trust was more valuable than the money itself. "That leaves 30. I can talk to a few people. Old Innovatech guys. People who know what you can do." The transaction was handled by a junior executive in Sterling's acquisitions department, a man who mirrored his boss's arrogance but lacked her intelligence. He barely looked at Elias and Marcus as they sat in the sterile conference room. He pushed the paperwork across the table, a smirk playing on his lips. "You understand you're buying this property as is, where is," he said, enunciating each word as if speaking to a child. "That means all the junk inside is your problem now. Environmental abatement, demolition, disposal. It's all on you." "We understand," Marcus said, his voice level and professional. Elias said nothing. He simply signed the documents with a steady hand. He slid the cashier's check for $100,000 across the table. The executive picked it up, glanced at it, and laughed. A short, sharp bark of disbelief. "Have fun with your junkyard, gentlemen," he said as he ushered them out. The door clicked shut behind them. Standing in the hallway, Marcus looked at Elias. "Are you sure about this?" Elias held up the keys the executive had tossed onto the table. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," he said. The first day, Elias walked the property alone. It was a pilgrimage. The familiar scent of coolant and ozone still lingered in the air of the main workshop, a ghost of its former productivity. A thick layer of dust covered everything, a gray shroud over sleeping giants. He went directly to Workshop C, the advanced materials and fabrication wing. The doors were secured with a high-end digital lock. He keyed in his old override code. After a decade of disuse, the mechanism whirred, and the heavy door hissed open. Inside, the air was cold and dry, circulated by a backup power system he himself had designed. Tarp-covered shapes filled the room. He walked to the largest one and pulled back the heavy canvas. Underneath sat the centerpiece of the old facility, a 5-axis CNC milling machine, a custom-built German marvel capable of machining materials to a tolerance of a single micron. It was one of only 3 such machines in the world. Sterling's auditors had written it off as a bespoke piece of equipment with no resale value. Elias knew that a defense contractor would pay millions for access to a machine like this. He moved to the next shape. A selective laser sintering machine for 3D printing in exotic metal alloys. Another custom piece. He went from one machine to the next, a quiet inventory of priceless, forgotten technology. Catherine Sterling had not sold him a junkyard. She had sold him a kingdom, and she had done it for the price of the dirt it stood on. That night, he made a list. Not of the machines, but of men. He called them one by one. Kenji Tanaka, the best machinist he had ever known, now working at a chain oil change shop. David Chen, a software engineer who had written the control code for the CNC mill, now designing mobile phone games. He called a dozen men, all former members of the Innovatech team, all brilliant, all cast aside and now underemployed. He didn't offer them a salary, he couldn't. He offered them a percentage. He offered them a chance to build things again. Every single one of them said yes. The work began. It was slow, methodical, and deeply satisfying. They were not restoring a factory, they were resurrecting it. They started with the infrastructure. Elias, using his encyclopedic knowledge of the facility, directed the recommissioning of the electrical, plumbing, and HVAC systems. They patched the leaky roof, replaced broken windows, and scrubbed a decade of grime from the floors. There was no chatter, just the quiet hum of competent people engaged in meaningful work. They moved with a shared purpose, each man an expert in his domain, trusting the others implicitly. Lily would come to the factory after school, doing her homework in the clean, quiet office that had once been the director's, the same office where Catherine Sterling had decided to dismantle their world. She would watch her father and his team, her serious eyes taking in the process, the slow transformation of dust and silence into light and purpose. Once the facility was stable, they turned their attention to the machines. They were not merely turned on, they were recalibrated, stripped down, cleaned, and reassembled. Elias's hands, which had been fixing leaky faucets just weeks before, were now tuning laser arrays and balancing magnetic bearings. He and his team worked from dawn until long after dusk, fueled by coffee and a shared, unspoken desire to prove that what they built had value, that they had value. They were reclaiming their own history, piece by painstaking piece. The process was a montage of quiet competence. The precise clicks of a micrometer, the low hum of a diagnostic program, the clean scent of machine oil, the focused silence of a team in perfect sync. They overcame small problems with quiet ingenuity. A rare vacuum pump was needed. Elias found one on a military surplus website. A control board was fried. David Chen spent 3 days rewriting the code to work with a modern replacement. There was no drama, only the methodical application of skill to a series of complex problems. 6 months after they had started, the first major project was complete. They had fully restored the 5-axis CNC mill. It was not just working, it was better than new. David had updated the software, and Elias had machined new components for it that eliminated a microscopic vibration he had always known was its one flaw. Their first client was a German automotive company, one of Innovatech's old customers, whom Marcus had contacted quietly. They needed a prototype turbocharger impeller blade made from a single crystal titanium alloy, a component no other workshop in the world had been able to produce successfully. Elias's team took the job. They worked for 72 hours straight. Elias himself oversaw the final milling process, his eyes watching the data stream, his hands resting lightly on the machine's control panel, feeling for the slightest tremor. The finished blade was a thing of sculptural beauty, a perfect, impossible object. They shipped it to Germany. 2 weeks later, Marcus received a wire transfer for $2.5 million. It was the first fruit of their labor, a quiet, definitive validation of Elias's initial assessment. They did not celebrate. They paid back Marcus's loan, paid themselves a small salary, and invested the rest back into the company. They named it Thorn Precision. The work continued. The news reached Catherine Sterling in the form of a single line in an obscure aerospace industry trade journal. It was a brief article about Thorn Precision, a new, small American firm that had secured a lucrative contract with the Department of Defense to manufacture non-critical components for a next-generation fighter jet. The article mentioned their unique fabrication capabilities and their location at the Old North Plant Industrial Park. Catherine read the name of the facility and felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. It had to be a mistake. A typo. "David," she called over the intercom, her voice tight. "Get in here." Her young assistant entered, looking nervous. "Yes, Miss Sterling. I want to know everything about a company called Thorn Precision," she commanded. "Now." David, the same young man who had checked Elias in for his interview, was diligent. He was also the one who had felt a pang of unease that day, a sense that a mistake was being made. He dug into the public records. He found the property sale document, the ridiculously low price, the name of the buyer, a shell corporation set up by Marcus Cole. Then he found the corporate registration for Thorne Precision. The principal officer was listed as Elias Thorne. The name from the interview. The name from the old Innovatech employee files. The drowned rat. He spent the next 2 days compiling a dossier. He learned about the German automotive contract through a contact in Hamburg. He learned about the defense contract. He learned about the team of former Innovatech engineers Elias had assembled. He pieced together the story, and the scale of Catherine's misjudgment became horrifyingly clear. She hadn't just sold a worthless plot of land. She had sold a fully equipped, world-class R&D facility, complete with its core team of elite talent, to the one man on Earth who knew its true value. And she had sold it for less than the cost of a single one of her company cars. He prepared a report, his hands shaking slightly as he printed it. This was the kind of mistake that ended careers. He walked into Catherine's office and placed the folder on her desk without a word. She opened it. She read for 10 minutes in absolute silence, her face growing paler with each page. The disbelief morphed into rage, then into a cold, dawning horror. The numbers were undeniable. Thorne Precision was on track to generate more profit in its first year than sterling conglomerates made from the entire division that had once been Innovatech. She had thrown away a diamond, convinced it was a piece of glass. Her first act was to summon the junior executive who had handled the sale. He entered her office, still wearing his characteristic smirk. It vanished the moment he saw her face. She didn't raise her voice. She spoke in a low, deadly monotone. "You're fired," she said. "Your incompetence has cost this company tens of millions of dollars. Possibly hundreds. Get out of my building," he stammered, tried to defend himself, but she just pointed to the door. He was the scapegoat, the sacrificial lamb for her own colossal failure of vision. Firing him was a reflex, but it solved nothing. The value was still gone. Her next call was to her legal team. They were blunt. The sale was ironclad. The as-is, where-is clause she had been so proud of now protected Elias completely. She couldn't sue him. She couldn't reclaim the property. She had only one option left. She had to deal with him. She looked at David, who was still standing by the door. "Get me a meeting with Elias Thorne," she said, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. "Tell him I want to discuss a partnership." The meeting was set on Elias's terms. It would take place at Thorne Precision. Catherine's Maybach pulled through the now-repaired gates and into a parking lot where the lines had been freshly painted. The weeds were gone. The building's windows gleamed. She stepped out of the car into a world she had discarded, now remade. She wore a tailored suit of charcoal gray, a suit of armor for the battle she intended to fight. David followed a step behind her, carrying a leather briefcase. Elias met them at the door. He was not wearing a suit. He wore the same kind of practical work clothes he always did, clean flannel shirt, dark work pants, sturdy boots. He was not smiling, nor was he hostile. His expression was neutral, observant. He led them not to an office, but directly onto the workshop floor. The air hummed with the quiet, productive energy of advanced machinery. The space was immaculate. Her former junkyard was now a temple of high technology. Kenji Tanaka glanced up from a calibration monitor, gave her a brief, unreadable look, and returned to his work. They stood in the shadow of the 5-axis mill, the machine at the heart of her mistake. "Miss Sterling," Elias said. It was a simple acknowledgement of her presence. Catherine fought to regain control of the situation, to re-establish the old hierarchy. "Mr. Thorne," she began, her voice crisp. "You've been busy. I'm impressed. What you've managed to accomplish here is remarkable." The compliment was a weapon, an attempt to patronize. Elias did not react to the praise. "The potential was always here," he said. "It just needed to be seen." The simple statement cut her more deeply than any insult. He was not just talking about the machines. He was talking about the people. He was talking about himself. He was talking about her blindness. "Sterling Conglomerates is always looking to partner with innovative companies," she pressed on, forcing the words out. "We could provide capital for expansion. Access to our global distribution network. A strategic partnership would be mutually beneficial. She was offering him a place back at the table, assuming he still wanted one. Elias looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something behind the quiet facade. It wasn't anger or triumph. It was a profound, unshakable certainty. "We don't need capital," he said. "Our order book is full for the next 3 years. And we already have a distributor in Europe." He paused. "We are not looking for a partner." The rejection was absolute, delivered without emotion. It was not a negotiating tactic. It was a statement of fact. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been completely inverted. She was the one who needed him. Her company had lost its R&D edge, and he now owned one of the most advanced fabrication facilities on the continent. She had come here to make an offer, and he was turning her away as if she were an irrelevant distraction. "There must be some arrangement we can come to," she insisted, a hint of desperation creeping into her voice. "A supply contract. We could be your biggest customer." Elias considered this for a moment. He looked around his workshop, at his team, at the quiet, focused work being done. He had not built this place for revenge. He had built it to do good work, to provide for his daughter, and to create a place of stability for the people his old world had discarded. Revenge was an emotion, and his decisions were based on logic and principle. "Send us a proposal," he said finally. "Our rates are non-negotiable. We do not offer exclusivity. And we require 50% payment up front. If your terms are acceptable, we will consider adding you to our client list." He had not accepted a partnership. He had offered to let her be a customer, on the same terms as anyone else, and only if it suited him. It was the most complete and devastating dismissal she had ever experienced. She had come to his turf, and he had made her beg. There was nothing more to say. She gave a stiff nod. "My office will be in touch," she said. She turned and walked out of the workshop, her heels clicking on the clean concrete floor, the sound no longer one of authority, but of retreat. Elias did not watch her go. He turned back to his work, his attention already on the next problem to be solved. The victory was not in her defeat, but in the hum of the machines around him. Later that evening, after the last of his team had gone home, he walked through the silent workshop. The new sign had been installed by the gate that week. It was simple, made of brushed steel, with clean, sans serif lettering, Thorn precision. It was not a monument to his success, but a simple statement of identity. His work. His name. He went to the small office where Lily was finishing her math homework. She looked up and smiled. "Did the lady in the fancy suit like our machines, Daddy?" she asked. "I think she understood them," Elias replied, sitting down beside her. He looked at the complex equations she was solving, the neat, orderly progression of her logic. He felt a quiet, profound sense of peace. He had not become the thing he had defeated. He had not adopted the arrogance or the ruthlessness of Catherine Sterling's world. He had simply built a better one on the ruins of her misjudgment. His success was not measured in stock prices or market share, but in the quiet stability of this moment, his daughter safe, his friends employed, and good work waiting to be done in the morning. He had everything he needed. He had won.